Hi everyone. Welcome to the Formus channel. In this video I would like to tell you how to fill out Form I-9 Employment Eligibility Verification. Please note that the information provided on this channel does not constitute or is intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all informational content and materials available on this channel are for general informational purposes only. In the description of this video, I left a link to a web page with a fillable PDF Form I-9, which you can fill out online there, or download it and fill out in electronic or paper form. So let's continue. Let me tell you a little about the purpose of Form I-9. Employers and employees must complete the respective sections of Form I-9. The form is used to document verification of the identity and employment authorization of each new employee, both a United States citizen and non-citizen hired after November 6, 1986 to work in the United States. In the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands (CNMI), employers must complete Form I-9 to document the verification of the identity and employment authorization of each new employee, both United States citizen and non-citizen hired after November 27, 2011. Employee is a person who performs labor or services in the United States for an employer in return for wages or other remuneration. The term employee does not include individuals who do not receive any form of remuneration, for example, volunteers, independent contractors, or those engaged in certain casual domestic employment. Employees must complete and sign Section 1 of Form I-9 no later than the first day of employment, that is, the date the employee begins performing labor or services in the United States in return for wages or other remuneration. Employees may complete Section 1 before the first day of employment, but cannot complete the form before acceptance of an offer of employment. Employer is a person or entity, including an agent or anyone acting directly or indirectly in the interest thereof, who engages the services or labor of an employee to be performed in the United States for wages or other remuneration. This includes recruiters and referrers for a fee who are agricultural associations, agricultural employers, or farm labor contractors. Employers in the United States, except Puerto Rico, must complete the English language version of Form I-9. Only employees located in Puerto Rico may complete the Spanish language version of Form I-9 instead of the English language version. Any employer may use the Spanish language form and instructions as a translation tool. All employers must make the instructions for Form I-9 and list of acceptable documents available to the employee when completing the Form I-9 and when requesting that the employee present documentation to complete Supplement B, Reverification, and Rehire. Next, I will talk about this in more detail. Ensure that the employee completes Section 1. Complete Section 2 within 3 business days after the employee's first day of employment. If you hire an individual for less than 3 business days, complete Section 2 no later than the first day of employment. Complete Supplement B, Reverification, and Rehire when applicable. Leave a field blank if it does not apply and allow employees to leave fields blank in Section 1, where appropriate. Retain completed forms. You are not required to retain or store the pages containing the list of acceptable documents or the instructions for Form I-9. Do not mail completed forms to United States Citizenship and Immigration Services (USCIS) or Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE). Section 1. Employee Information and Attestation. Step 1. Employee completes Section 1 no later than the first day of employment. All employees must provide their current legal name, complete address, and date of birth. If other fields do not apply, leave them blank. When completing the name fields, enter your current legal name and any last names you previously used, including any hyphens or punctuation. If you only have one name, enter it in the last name field and then enter unknown in the first name field. Providing your 9-digit Social Security number in the Social Security number field is voluntary unless your employer participates in E-Verify. See page 5 for instructions related to E-Verify. Do not enter an individual taxpayer identification number as your Social Security number. Step 2. Attest to your citizenship or immigration status. You must select one box to attest to your citizenship or immigration status. A citizen of the United States. A non-citizen national of the United States, an individual born in American Samoa, certain former citizens of the former Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, and certain children of non-citizen nationals born abroad. A lawful permanent resident, an individual who is not a United States citizen and who resides in the United States under a legally recognized and lawfully recorded permanent residence as an immigrant. Conditional residents should select the status. Asylees and refugees should not select this status. They should instead select a non-citizen authorized to work. If you select a lawful permanent resident, enter your 7 to 9-digit USCIS number or number in the space provided. A non-citizen other than item numbers 2 and 3 above authorized to work, an individual who has authorization to work but is not a United States citizen, non-citizen national, or lawful permanent resident. If you select this box, enter the date that your employment authorization expires, if any, in the space provided. In most cases, your employment authorization expiration date is found in the documentation evidencing your employment authorization. If your employment authorization documentation has been automatically extended by the issuing authority, enter the expiration date of the automatic extension in this space. Refugees, asylees, and certain citizens of the Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or Palau, and other non-citizens authorized to work whose employment authorization does not have an expiration date should enter N/ in the expiration date field. Employees who select a non-citizen authorized to work must enter one of the following to complete Section 1. ASCII number / a number 7 to 9 digits. Form I-94 admission number 11 digits, or foreign passport number in the country of issuance. Your employer may not ask for documentation to verify the information you entered in Section 1. Step 3. Sign and enter the date you signed Section 1. Do not backdate this field. Step 4. Preparer and / or translator completes a preparer and / or translator certification, if applicable. If a preparer and / or translator assists an employee in completing Section 1, that person must complete a certification area on Supplement A Preparer and / or translator certification for Section 1, located on page 3 of Form I-9. There is no limit to the number of preparers and / or translators an employee may use. Each preparer and / or translator must complete and sign a separate certification area. Employers must ensure that they retain any additional pages with the employee's completed Form I-9. If the employee does not use a preparer or translator, employers are not required to provide or retain Supplement A. Step 5. Present Form I-9 documentation. Within 3 business days after your first day of employment, you, the employee, must present to your employer original, acceptable, and unexpired documentation that establishes your identity and employment authorization. For example, if you begin employment on Monday, you must present documentation on or before the Thursday of that week. However, if you were hired to work for less than 3 business days, you must present documentation no later than the first day of employment. Choose which documentation to present to your employer from the list of acceptable documents. An employer cannot specify which documentation you may present from the list of acceptable documents. You may present either one selection from list A or a combination of one selection from list B and one selection from list C. In certain cases, you may also present an acceptable receipt for list A, B, or C documents. For more information on receipts, refer to the I-274. Lists of documentation show both identity and employment authorization. Some documentation must be presented together to be considered acceptable listed documentation. If you present acceptable listed documentation, you should not be asked to present List B and List C documentation. List B documentation shows identity only, and List C documentation shows employment authorization only. If you present acceptable List B and List C documentation, you should not be asked to present listed documentation. Guidance is available in I-274 if you are under the age of 18 or have a disability special placement and cannot provide List B documentation. Your employer must physically examine the documentation you present to complete Form I-9, or examine them consistent with an alternative procedure authorized by the Secretary of DHS. If your documentation reasonably appears to be genuine and to relate to you, your employer must accept the documentation. If your documentation does not reasonably appear to be genuine or to relate to you, your employer must reject it and provide you with an opportunity to present other documentation. Your employer may choose to make copies of your documentation, but must return the original to you. Your employer may not ask for documentation to verify the information you entered in Section 1. Section 2. Employer Review and Verification. Before completing Section 2, you, the employer, should review Section 1. If you find any errors or missing information in Section 1, the employee must correct the error and then initial and date the correction. You may designate an authorized representative to act on your behalf to complete Section 2. Your authorized representative must complete Section 2 by physically examining evidence of the employee's identity and employment authorization within 3 business days after the employee's first day of employment. For example, if an employee begins employment on Monday, you must review the employee's documentation and complete Section 2 on or before the Thursday of that week. However, if the individual will work for less than 3 business days, Section 2 must be completed no later than the first day of employment. Step 1. Enter information from the documentation the employee presents. You, the employer or authorized representative, must either physically examine or examine consistent with an alternative procedure authorized by the Secretary of DHS the original, acceptable, and unexpired documentation the employee presents from the list of acceptable documents to complete the applicable document fields in Section 2. You cannot specify which documentation an employee may present from these lists of acceptable documents. A document is acceptable if it reasonably appears to be genuine and to relate to the person presenting it. Photocopies, except for certified copies of birth certificates, are not acceptable for Form I-9. Employees must present one selection from List or a combination of one selection from List B and one selection from List C. Listed documentation shows both identity and employment authorization. Enter the required information from the listed documentation in the first set of document entry fields in the listed column. Some listed documentation consists of a combination of documents that must be presented together to be considered acceptable listed documentation. If the employee presents a combination of documents for List A, use the second and third sets of document entry fields in the listed column. Use the additional information space as necessary for additional documents. When entering document information in this space, ensure you record all available document information such as the document title, issuing authority, document number, and expiration date. If an employee presents acceptable listed documentation, do not ask the employee to present List B and List C documentation. List B documentation shows identity only, and List C documentation shows employment authorization only. If an employee presents acceptable List B and List C documentation, enter the required information from the documentation under each corresponding column and do not ask the employee to present listed documentation. If an employee under the age of 18 or with disability special placement cannot provide List B documentation, see the I-274 for guidance. In certain cases, the employee may present an acceptable receipt for List A, B, or C documentation. For more information on receipts, refer to the lists of acceptable documents in the I-274. Photocopies. You may make photocopies of the documentation examined, but must return the original documentation to the employee. You must retain any photocopies you make with Form I-9 in case of an inspection by DHS, the Department of Labor, or the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Immigrant and Employee Rights Section. Step 2. Enter additional information if necessary. Use the additional information field to record any additional information required to complete Section 2 or any updates that are necessary once Section 2 is complete. Initial and date each additional notation. See the I-274 for more information. Such notations include, but are not limited to, those required by DHS, such as extensions of employment authorization or a document's expiration date. Replacement document information if a receipt was previously presented. Additional documentation that may be presented by certain non-immigrant employees. You may also enter optional information such as termination dates, form retention dates, and E-Verification numbers, if applicable. Step 3. Select the box in the additional information area if you used an alternate procedure for document examination authorized by the Secretary of DHS. You must select this box if you used an alternative procedure authorized by DHS to examine the documents. You may refer to the I-274 for guidance on implementing alternative procedures for document examination approved by the Secretary of DHS. Step 4. Complete the employer certification. Employers or their authorized representatives, if applicable, must complete all applicable fields in this area and sign and date where indicated. Section 3/Supplement B. Reverification and Rehire. To reverify an employee's work authorization or document an employee's rehire, use Supplement B, Reverification and Rehire, formerly Section 3. Employers need only complete and retain the supplement page when employment authorization verification is required. Employers may choose to document a rehire on the supplement as well. Enter the employee's name at the top of each supplement page you use. In the new name field, record any change the employee reports at the time of reverification or rehire. Use a new section of the supplement for each instance of a reverification or rehire, sign and date that section when completed, and attach it to the employee's completed Form I-9. Use additional supplement pages as necessary. Use the additional information fields if the employee's documentation presented for reverification requires future updates. Reverifications. When reverification is required, you must reverify the employee by the earlier of the employment authorization expiration date stated in Section 1 if any, or the expiration date of the List or List C employment authorization documentation recorded in Section 2. Employers should complete any subsequent reverifications, if required, by the expiration date of the List or List C documentation entered during the employee's most recent reverification. For reverification, employees must present acceptable documentation from either List or List C showing their continuing authorization to work in the United States. You must allow employees to choose which acceptable documentation to present for reverification. Employees are not required to show the same type of document they presented previously. Enter the documentation information in the appropriate fields provided. You should not reverify the employment authorization of United States citizens and non-citizen nationals, or lawful permanent residents including conditional residents who presented a permanent resident card Form I-551 or other employment authorization documentation that is not subject to reverification such as an unrestricted Social Security card. Reverification does not apply to List B documentation. Reverification may not apply to certain non-citizens. See the A-274 for more information about when reverification may not be required. Rehires. If you rehire an employee within 3 years from the date the employee's Form I-9 was first completed, you may complete the supplement and attach it to the employee's previously completed Form I-9. If the employee remains employment authorized as indicated on the previously completed Form I-9, record the date of rehire and any name changes. If the employee's employment authorization or list or C documents have expired, you must re-verify the employee as described above. Alternatively, you may complete a new Form I-9 for rehired employees. You must complete a new Form I-9 for any employee you rehired more than 3 years after you originally completed a Form I-9 for that employee. Thank you for watching.